Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Hello, my name is Erin Axelrod, a partner and worker owner at Lift Economy, and I'm so pleased to be joined today by my guest, Brianna Kilcullen, the founder of Anact, a sustainable towel brand. She is originally from Atlantic Beach, Florida. In 2019, she helped legalize SB 1020 in Florida while launching Anact. Prior to starting Anact, she worked in the apparel industry for Prana, a subsidiary of Columbia Sportswear and Under Armour, where she created the first full-time sustainability role, traveling to 40 countries, working in factories on almost every continent. She is a proud dual citizen in the US and Ireland. Brianna, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Erin. I'm so excited to be here.
So excited to have you. Can you tell us a little bit about Anact and particularly some of the innovative ways that you are revolutionizing, bringing natural materials into the textile industry?
Anact really came about in 2017 and just really feeling frustrated looking around and seeing the lack of sustainable brands in the space. And I felt that Patagonia should be the norm, not the exception. And so I wanted to see the systemic issues in the supply chain for textiles be fixed. I wanted specifically to see us move away from a linear to a circular model where we design for end of life. I wanted to see natural plant fibers be used and to get weaned off of the fossil fuel industry and these synthetic fibers that, have really crowded the space. And I wanted to give back my experiences of working in the apparel industry and just create a light, something inspiring around activism and positivity, and really make people, including myself, feel like they had agency and sovereignty over creating the world that they wished exist. So those were the key drivers and continued key drivers. And hemp is really that vehicle and the towel in which we do that. For me, living in California and seeing how the hemp industry was growing and how it could be food, fiber, fuel, etc., was really exciting. And I think that when you're starting a new brand, marketing is so hard, and being able to piggyback off of a trending industry, an emerging industry, helps us get a lot of free marketing as well. But I think ultimately I just am obsessed with hemp and the role that I believe it will play in creating regenerative economies and regenerative businesses.
And I love that you touched on activism and marketing and how those two can play in together. I'd be curious, tell us a little bit about the natural fiber, just so folks have a sense of it, about why you picked towels to start with and that sort of thing, just so people can picture how are you bringing these materials together and delivering them to the market.
Sure. So the reason why I fell in love with hemp was because of the quantitative data around it. So when I was at Prana, we had a material thermometer that had been gifted by Nike that showed the ranking of fibers from best to worst. And so hemp was at the top. And from the performance side of being durable, of being antibacterial, but then also from the sustainability side of utilizing little to no water to grow, no insecticides or pesticides. And those are the initial seeds that were planted around why are we not using this fiber more? And that was ultimately why I got involved in the policy side, because it, was illegal since 1937 to grow, but we had been importing it. And so that was the first connection to hemp. So it got on my radar. I started testing products and was interested. And then I was living in San Diego. I did not have a washer or dryer. And I was always being asked, what are the sustainable products that we should use? And I could not find a towel that didn't pick up a mildewy smell. And so I was like, this is not sustainable to keep going to the laundromat and wash my towels. I'm not going to replace them. And so when I discovered hemp and I looked on Google for hemp towels, I noticed there was a gap in the market. And so I'm a firm believer in we should be solving problems. And that is what will get you through all of the ups and downs as an entrepreneur. And so when I saw that gap and had that internal problem, I thought, I bet there's other people who feel this way and would find value in this product. I'm going to go make it. And we got funded on Kickstarter and grow it organically. And that's what the past few years have been.
Amazing. And I'm sure you've learned a lot about supply chains as you've established your business. What are some insights that you would share for a general consumer, but also other businesses around supply chains? What are leverage points for change?
So my background was supply chain at Under Armour and at Promise. So when I first started at Under Armour, I managed factories in Central America. So I am obsessed with supply chain. Not only textiles, just any industry. I think it's so fascinating to learn about all of the different people that come together really in countries to create a product. And for the textile industry, it can be hemp coming and cotton coming from China and then being spun and woven in Taiwan and then shipped to Central America and cut and sewn and then shipped to the US and Europe as a final finished good. And I just find that so complex and fascinating and interesting how many people and cultures it takes to produce one garment. And so I would say, the supply chain is quite complex for textiles. And then as it relates to the US and to hemp specifically, I was intrigued to see, could we create the hemp textile supply chain and apply innovation and automation and things that don't currently exist. So we don't have to have this huge carbon footprint to make one garment. I would say as it relates to the US now in 2026, it does feel like we're in this weird place where there is this push for made in America, but there's a gap in the innovation that it takes. And there's a lack of, are we an information technology country? Are we moving towards full-on nationalism and manufacturing everything? And if so, then there are people who are going to do that. It doesn't seem like exist anymore or are interested in those positions. And then if we were going to use technology or use innovation to do that, then who's funding that? And it seems like, unfortunately, the apparel industry just gets a pass where we're just allowed brands can continue to crank out product and not be responsible for what happens with it when they're done. And so I think that the EU is doing a lot of work to start to create that. But the best way that I explain it is that, I think in the lack of policy and regulation in the US for textiles, what it has done is that if you were to have a bachelorette party, you could easily go and get product made and have it customized and have it shipped in a week. Whereas if you were creating a new kombucha flavor for your bachelorette party, the liability would be so much higher, right? That you couldn't just go create that. So I think because everyone has so much access, that it really has diluted the value of what it takes to make our products. And I think that is something that I'm hoping that the more transparency around supply chains will create more policy and regulations and legislation that makes brands responsible for disclosing the entire supply chain. And also when customers are done with their product, where does it go next? Because the social and environmental ramifications of this industry have just been too ginormous for too long. And I think that's something that we have to change.
I think a lot about the parallels with disposable plastics and garments, right? There's no accountability to these companies for once that plastic gets discarded, the company is not responsible for discarding it in a way that doesn't end up in a sea turtle mouth and obviously the microplastics. And of course, underlining all this entire conversation as well are the human rights abuses that are rampant in the global textile supply chain. So this both, ecological framework, but really the complexity of how do we clothe ourselves in ways that don't obfuscate the livelihoods and quality of life for so many people. If you have any comments on that, or I'd love for you to also talk about some of Anact's innovations in the space of okay, how do you affect this culture change through the brand community that you've been building?
I think that's a great question around just the apparel industry's impact. And, I'd like to think that people mean well, that, we try to go from, for example, instead of people hand sewing their products, we created factory systems. So then that creates more time to do other things. But then I think the more that we know, the better we have to do. And that's how I feel in the system is after working on the ground in all of these countries with farmers and factory workers, it's clear the system is not working. And The True Cost is such a great documentary by Andrew Morgan that really highlights that because so many people have never visited where their clothes are made. So we have a complete disconnect. Whereas, the food industry, people have a little bit better understanding of how that works. So I think that in terms of how does Anact bridge that gap. I think for us, it's saying, here's our vision, here's our North Star, here's what perfection for us would look like and success. But then also here's our reality. And so in order for us to bridge this gap, this is how we're doing it via selling our product, which supports that supply chain and incentivizes that farmer to grow hemp because they know there's a market for them to sell it to because we're creating that. It's hosting community events like the International Women's Day event that we just did in Austin and educating and highlighting sustainability across the board and the industries that are innovating. And so I think for us, it's just really not having a zero sum mentality and saying, look, like we wish in a perfect world, this is how this would look. But by buying a towel or supporting us or attending an event, like we can take one step, one act to get there.
So as you were just mentioning, Brianna, I wanted to double click on this comparison you made around how people are aware of maybe they have a chance to talk to some of their farmers and people. We're making broad generalizations, right? As people are so diverse, but at least in the US context, that distancing from those who make our clothes. I think Fiber Shed and Rebecca Burgess, Teju Adisa Farrar, these Charity May, these leaders have been helping to close that gap a little bit through the Fiber Shed movement, which I encourage our listeners to check out if they haven't, and that Fiber Shed book. But you were talking about the ways in which Anact and your brand community is also supporting bringing that gap a little bit closer. So please continue around what you've been doing.
For us, it's just looking at perfection is the enemy of good. And really, how do we take simple act? I think that the sustainability world can be a very intense, everyone, you have to be vegan and you have to have no plastic in your house. And I think for us, it's that causes less change to happen because we all are in imperfect conditions. And so I think, again, it's really saying, look, if we could map out what this looks like in having transparent supply chains, sourcing directly, knowing all the farmers and where our fibers come from, being able to create carbon neutral and minimal impact supply chains to process the fiber and make our products, like we can. But right now, like, here's where we're at. And I think that is something that it's real, it's tangible, it's authentic. And it's something that I hope anyone listening to this feels inspired and not putting that pressure on themselves if they want to make a change, that it has to be all or nothing. Because I think that that's a tough mantra, to keep up with.
What are some things that you're watching in your industry or even in the world that's inspiring to you these days that you feel is really hopeful for the sector or the world as a whole?
Oh, wow. It's little things. Like one of my friends is a jewelry designer and she was just surfing in Puerto Rico and she was surfing next to AOC and she took a photo and posted it. And I don't know why, but it just made me so happy. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's just so cool to see women in my generation and age range doing really cool things, but then also taking time to be in nature and be outdoors and be authentic about their whole life. And I don't know why I can't stop thinking about how much that photo just made me happy, because sometimes I think that women were been sold a storyline of you don't get to do all the things. Like if you're doing work, you have to be a full-on career woman. And so I think what's inspiring most right now is this ability to build your own life on your own conditions and your own terms and to be multifaceted. That's really exciting for me. I think personally, professionally, for Anact, I think seeing the EU really double down on sustainability efforts and initiatives and acknowledging the environmental crisis and offering resources, tools, and mandates around that pumps me up, because it is really heavy if you do follow the news cycle or if you look around at what's happening globally. And I heard somebody say the other day, we're not supposed to be receiving all this information at once, and not especially by ourselves. And so I think thinking globally, but acting locally and measuring that's the stuff that really pumps me up these days.
Yeah, just to that point around the information overload, I was listening to the Trevor Noah podcast recently, and they were talking about how our current contemporary human brain is actually developmentally still from the Pleistocene. with saber-toothed tigers. And so it's just a reminder that our brain is really wired to glom onto the negative, pick up those things that are going to increase our rate of survival, and also, feedback loops that are quite different from how our brain has adapted to. So I think that's a really salient point. What would you ask of our listeners in terms of what do you need to thrive? How can consumers be really educated activists, like baked into the name and act of taking activism seriously and taking it as a daily charge? How would you respond to that prompt?
I would say that activism looks different based off of where each person lives and what their own goals are and their own experiences. So at Anact, we adhere to the 17 UN SDG goals, and those goals are globally ratified social and environmental initiatives that we need to address in order to continue to provide for the current generation and future generations by 2030. So what I always recommend is to look at those goals and see what resonates with you and what your community needs, and be focused around that. But I think that Enact is really about it's using the resources of where you're at with what you have and knowing the gaps that we have in society and taking that one act to create the world that you want to see. Because I think that creates a level of sanity and groundedness that is lacking in the world at the moment, to say, look, I did the best with what I could in that moment, and that's it. And I'll do the best with what I can in the next moment. And I think that gives us a level of control and authority that sometimes if you look at the media and look at the news, you don't feel like you have anymore.
And I love that you spoke to like the holism that is exciting you right now around like well-rounded human beings, well-rounded humans, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez surfing while she's doing this rad political work. And I think what you're speaking to for me also resonates around the wholeness of, we're individuals embedded in communities, and recognizing that our act is only meaningful in the context of lots of other people doing acts as well. And that there's a trap also of getting into this individualism, like hero mentality, that like we can make outsized contributions that can solve, something that really is the complexity of the crises of our time is going to take all minds, all hearts working together in alignment to solve. So thank you. That's really helpful to hear. I'm curious also if there's any specific entrepreneurial guidance that comes up for you around how you've transitioned from, working in these very large corporations to now founding a startup. Like, how would you share that with others around like how to navigate that and what you've learned along the way?
So we have a rule in Kelsey, who is our head of people and culture, and we talk about, which there's 3 rules when you start something new, which is don't die, don't run out of cash, and don't give up. And I know if you're like, as long as you're just, staying above all 3, it's when the magic happens, Erin. So yeah, I think that creating something that doesn't exist, bringing it to the world and getting feedback and tailoring it to get that product market fit is one of the hardest things like you can physically do. And I think that you just have to have enough belief that the value you provide is better than what is being provided. And the problem you're solving is this problem that needs to be solved. And I think those are the drivers that I'm pushed for, like a push to do, is just thinking about this conventional cotton industry is not working anymore with the amount of water it takes to grow the crops. And the landfills keep piling up with textiles that are not breaking down. And so I'm so driven by those problems and the solutions, and then showing the ROI and the financials around them, that gets me through all of the obstacles, in addition to getting to live a life on my own terms, right? Which is the exciting part about being an entrepreneur, is that you get to decide your schedule and your energy and where you want to go and what you want to do. And so that's what I would recommend to anyone, but really just focusing on what's the problem you're solving, what's the why, and is this providing more value than what is in the marketplace? And I think those are the things that will get you through. And then just having grit and resilience and knowing that you're going to get 100 more plus no's for investors, for sales, for, anything new. And that you just are waiting to get that yes. And then once you get that yes, then you get better each time.
Beautifully said. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share what Anact is doing. Last question. What can our listeners do to support Anact to be successful, and how can they get connected with your product?
Yeah, follow us at Anact Global. We're active on social. We're active on LinkedIn. You can buy a towel. The natural bath towel is our bestseller. That's at anact.com. You can attend events. We just had our big International Women's Day event in Austin, but we're gearing up for several events in Europe this summer. And yeah, if there's ever collaboration opportunities, you can send us a note at hello@anact.com.
And when they buy that towel, the natural bath towel, where is that hemp coming from?
So the hemp currently comes from France, and we spin and weave our towel in India, and then we import it to the US. That's been really cool to watch the supply chain evolve over the years. When we originally started, you could only get hemp in China. And now we've watched it expand into Europe, expand into India, and in the US, although it's just cost prohibitive and the infrastructure is not there yet. But it's really cool to see that continue to grow and become more transparent and more available.
Yeah. So integrated capital funders, if you're listening, like a collaborative grant with Anact around US producers and the whole supply chain would be really cool. And I hear you. We're a ways away, but that's actually how we first started talking and got started, is because of your interest in contributing and supporting the Winona's Hemp Project. So I appreciate you for that as well, and that leadership, and recognizing that, that gap between being able to buy a towel where just a few states away the hemp was grown. That's not a reality quite yet in the US, but you're bridging that gap by building market demand, by paying attention to really connected, just supply chains right now. And thank you so much for taking the time and joining us on the show. This was a really great conversation.
Of course. Thank you, Erin. And thank you for the opportunity and for the work that you're doing as well.
All right. Well, take good care and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. If you enjoyed this conversation and are looking to dive even deeper into the B Corp movement, you'll love our new podcast, Beyond the B, hosted by Lyft Economy's Amy Allison and me, Ryan Honeyman. Beyond the B is your insider's guide to the B Corp movement. You'll learn about the new B Corp standards shaping our community, how the B Corp movement is navigating the various tensions and challenges of growth, and how businesses like Patagonia are putting their commitments to people and planet in practice. Check out our latest episodes and free resources at lifteconomy.com/beyond. You can also subscribe to Beyond the B on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening.
Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. If you haven't gathered from our podcast already, we're really passionate about helping to build a future that works for all of us. If you share that passion and are looking to deepen your practice, we want to share a few ways to connect and learn directly with the Lift Economy team. You've likely heard of the Next Economy MBA, which we started almost 10 years ago and have trained over 800 alumni through the fundamentals of business design from a regenerative and just perspective. New this year, our Next Economy Fund will embody our values of democratically allocating resources to Next Economy entrepreneurs that are part of our alumni network. We've also launched 2 trainings that came directly out of our MBA community's desire for more in-depth skill building around 2 key topics: organizational leadership and personal life design. Next Economy Leadership is a workshop series designed to help culture leaders at purpose-driven organizations move towards full embodiment of their values. And Next Economy Living is a 6-month training designed to help everyday citizens and consumers take actionable next steps to transform their local communities to align with a future that works for all of us. You can hear about all of these offerings and other ways we're supporting the Next Economy movement at lifteconomy.com/next steps. We deeply appreciate you being a listener of our show, especially in a cultural moment when attention and community are hard to come by. We're amazed by the community of folks we get to learn alongside through these offerings and hope you'll consider joining us.